Hi, I'm Shaan Hurley, and I'm here today with Robert Green, a CAD consultant, and we're going to talk a little bit about CAD management issues.
Great to be here.
Thank you, Robert. First thing we want to talk about was CAD standards. I see a lot of companies that aren't using CAD standards. Why are they important? Why should they be doing them?
Well, I think if you're going to control work processes at all, if you're trying to achieve a measurable output of work, be that a building or a machine part or whatever it is, you have to have some sort of standard for doing the work. We have all sorts of standards to manage things like product safety and compliance. So why shouldn't we have CAD standards at the same time? It's really the only chance you have to have anything be controllable and to get a known and measurable result. Oh, and by the way, usually if you work to some standards, you're going to achieve more efficient throughput. You're going to have less rework, and bottom line is you save money as you produce more and more goods in the same amount of man hours. So I think that's the key reason why you want to standardize.
That's an important thing when you're really competitive in an industry, is to get those processes down, your standards, and stop leaving so much on the table.
That's exactly right. You know, you can look at companies that have essentially the same tools. I mean, they have the same computers, they have the same software, they have essentially the same people, the same lights, the same phones. Why is one company successful and another one isn't? It's usually because one is very process focused, they're standards driven, they know what they're doing. They're not running around in a chaotic type of environment simply hoping that things will get done right. They standardize, they process, and that's what allows them to get good results.
So what are some of the quick hits for a CAD manager to implement the standards?
I think what you have to look at is principally what are your people having trouble with? And that's pretty easy to do. All you have to do is listen and solicit input. So if people tell you that plotting is their big headache, or that they don't know how to get output from Department A to Department B in a format that's usable by Department B, now what the CAD manager has to do is look at those issues and say, okay, what are the real technical problems here? What do I need to overcome? And what software features do I need to use? Do I need to customize? What do I have to do to overcome the problem? But the first thing is, what is the problem? Then get a strategy in place for what you're going to do to solve it. And I would argue that the ultimate result of that is probably a standard process or work procedure.
So this would cover everything from, like you're talking about, the processes and stuff, but also things like what layers do things go on? What details do I insert? Things of that nature.
Right, and it can sometimes be a needle in a haystack thing. Someone might report that they're having a lot of difficulty plotting, when in reality you know that you've done a lot of work to try and standardize the plotting process. Well, you get to the actual user's desktop and you find out the reason it's not working is because they're not putting things where they should be. So it may not even be a standards problem, it may be an adherence to standards problem. Exactly. So there's a lot of detective work that goes on in the CAD manager's chair to get to that point.
So here's one of those really hard areas. How do you enforce the standards?
Oh, well.
And that you can't really hit them with a stick. You can't, I've heard administering electric shocks on the chair.
Yeah, physical violence is probably out.
Yeah.
What I try to do, and I try to advise CAD managers to do, is really to make it about workplace productivity, or it's all about the money. So if somebody is not following standard process and procedure, what they're really doing is they're causing rework for somebody else. So if you start to keep track of that time and you start to look at what are the downstream effects of not following standards, what is this doing at my shop floor? What is this doing at Q&A? What is this doing when I make final plots for the customer drawings? If you track all that rework downstream, you can now back up and you can say this person's lack of adherence to standards is costing us this much money. And if I go to senior management with a message of money, they're going to hear that. They may not know the bits and bytes of the standards argument I'm making. Matter of fact, they might not even care, but they do care about the money.
Yeah.
So that would be the number one hint that I would put out for CAD managers is make this a business process.
Yeah, this is one of those ones where you really have to be documenting this thing through time. You just can't run into the president's office and goes, it really sucks. We need standards, because that's probably not going to work.
That's right.
That's probably a career-limiting move.
Yeah, I actually sat in a meeting where one guy started explaining to his senior management team about somebody was actually exploding blocks, and everybody knows that leads to exposed attributes, which are on incorrect layers, and everybody knows that the color mapping now won't be right at our plotting script. And I think when he said the word plot was when his boss quit understanding.
Yeah,
so,
that's too much.
So what we needed to talk about was man hours. how many man hours were being consumed fixing those problems.
So that's kind of the way to promote the standards within the company. You're kind of moving into that.
I think at its root, a good CAD manager is essentially a technology translator, somebody who's turning this really weird mixture of technical factors and processes and programs and software and hardware, and you're basically distilling it down into business language that senior management can understand. You know, the real trick is to make it sound easy.
Right. And I've seen manuals go from almost an employee manual of how we do design and, you know, how the process works to simple, you know, the layers and things like that. Now, and they're not typically something that you just do once, you work your butt off on them, and then that's them. They're continually evolving as new technology and software and things like that come along.
Absolutely. I mean, the design environment you and I work in now is radically different than it was 20 years ago. It's quite different than it was 10 years ago. And new tools are going to demand new processes, and new processes mean new standards. It's inescapable. So if any CAD manager ever thinks they're done with this, you're simply not done with it. It's an ongoing thing.
Right. It's a constant thing. So thank you very much, Robert.